Arnold, three quick introductory comments, if I may, to set the scene for your thoughts on economic and financial matters in the community. When the 17 African peer review mechanism reports were recently reviewed, they concluded that for the most part, business exists at the periphery of regional integration schemes. The ECHO had been planned for the West African Monetary Zone for 2015 as a prelude to a regional single currency incorporating the UEMOA WEMU countries as well. Is a single currency either necessary or desirable or possible? And at the end of 2013, Dr. Barr, who is the Commissioner for Macroeconomic Policy within the community, lamented the inherent weakness of the bloc's economic base and said it was undermined by high costs of transport and energy and the dearth of internal trade. Now, I'm slightly abusing Chairman's prerogative by putting those points, and if you don't want to address any of them, perhaps we can come back to them in the questions and answers. And with that, I will hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. The ECOWAS is something that's very close to my heart, not because EcoBank is named after ECOWAS, which it isn't, but because I spent pretty much most of my banking career in West and Central Africa. What we need to be clear about is that ECOWAS actually has two economic blocks. It has ECOWAS, which is the Francophone and Anglophone countries, and within that block is UEMOA, which is Union Economic and Monetary West Africa, which is the Francophone bloc. That creates significant stress within the bloc because obviously the two are not moving in tandem, they're not moving in the same direction. And one of the challenges I had when I was at EcoBank was trying to get them to understand that it's better for everyone if they worked as a bloc rather than having separate agendas. For example, in the Francophone countries, you have the CFA, which is tied to the euro, and there's certain reserve requirements that those countries have to meet. In the Anglophone countries, it's free for all. Ghana has its currency, Nigeria has, Liberia has, the Gambia has, and you then have Guinea, which was initially part of the CFA bloc and then pulled out. So when you look at ECOWAS, ECOWAS has been a pioneer in many ways. Free movement of people has been on since 1975-76, and that has worked very well. Where I think ECOWAS has not worked as well, it's in the other aspects, the regional integration aspects, in terms of the free movement of goods and services, free movement of capital, and so forth. I think that has been due to several reasons. One is that region has been challenged significantly by political unrest. We had the Liberia incident, then Cote d'Ivoire, then Sierra Leone, and even Nigeria to some extent. So we do have a situation where I believe that there is a willingness to get things done, but there is the inability to execute. And the inability to execute is something that I think affects not just West Africa, but affects all of Africa. There is a tendency to build African economic models that, in my view, are based on developed country models. So because I talk of the proverb of the poor guy who wants to get rich and wants to do that by behaving like the rich guy who's already rich. It's always the road to penury. And I think we've seen things like that happening in some African countries. I mean, Ghana was a star of Africa 3 years ago. It had a growth rate of 13%, and 3 years later, Ghana needs help. There's something fundamentally and structurally wrong there. But I think in terms of what ECOWAS is trying to achieve, I think a lot of work has been done. The protocols have been signed. Even as we speak, there are hundreds of millions of dollars sitting with the central banks as part of the Fund de Compensation. Okay, so it's fine for them to sign all this. It's fine for them to say this comes into effect next year or this year. The fact that coming into effect doesn't mean it happens. It means that legally it could happen, but practically it doesn't happen. And I think for ECOWAS particularly, that has been the biggest challenge. Moving from talk to action, and understanding that that takes a certain force. And one of the things I lament today is the absence of African leaders. All the African leaders have gone home. The Kwame Nkrumahs, people, Nyereres, the Kaundes, people who thought in a Pan-African perspective are no longer there. Everyone has gone home. They all look at their various countries and they focus on the various countries. There is a lack of leadership of the sort that we had for the Lagos Treaty currently. And that, to me, actually is the base of all the problems. The protocols don't work, the treaties don't work unless there are people who are willing to make them happen. And in West Africa, certainly for ECOWAS, Nigeria needs to play a much better role, much bigger role. I'd like to stop there for the time. I think I've thrown quite a few ideas out, but the single currency, just to talk on that, in my opinion, the single currency is a dream. It's probably not going to happen for a long time. It doesn't make economic sense for the simple reason that certain convergence criteria that have to be met, that many of the countries will struggle to meet. And the one example we have is the euro, which is really not a very good example, given what's going on. So what I have advocated for, and I started saying this 20 years ago, not because I was any smarter than anyone else, is regional convertibility. Let's just allow the currencies to convert. Okay, let's not, we don't need an echo, but we need to convert the CD into the CFA, into the Naira, into the Dalasi, the Guinean franc. That is not happening today. And unless that happens, you don't have that free movement of capital that we're talking about. Why shouldn't it happen? Just because they haven't gotten around to making it happen. I used to run EcoBank. We were in all the countries of the ECOWAS. So I told them, use us as your central bank. I mean, we are there everywhere, right? And the central bankers, governors laughed at me and told me not to have undue ambitions. But the point I was trying to make is that if you look at a bank such as EcoBank, you do have a payment infrastructure for the region. But it doesn't work unless the currencies can convert to each other. So if you say you're going to have the ECO is actually another name for the Naira because the Nigerian Naira is 80% or so of the region. Mm-hmm. Now, the Francophone people are not going to like it. The Ghanaians are not going to like it because already Nigeria is so dominant. So you've got to find some way of doing it that makes it work. And I think regional convertibility as a first step is probably the right way to go. And then once we get to love how it works, then maybe we can think of an echo.
Thank you very much indeed for those comments. Can I just ask for some questions perhaps now on economic or financial matters? Or points from the floor?
Can I just make one point before?
Absolutely.
There is a fallacy in Africa which I really must address. Every time we talk about Africa, we talk about the African miracle, the Africa transformation. Africa is growing, what, 4, 5, maybe 6%? 7 if we want to be generous. China drops from 13% to 7%. The world is really concerned. Really? That's really a problem. But Africa growing at single digits, mid-single digits, is considered significant progress. That's probably true. But keep in mind that China grew for 3 decades at double digits. Now, the challenge for me in ECOWAS and in Africa is, what do we need to do to move Africa into that zone? The answer is really creating bigger markets, which is why this conference is quite topical, because the solution is there, but I think the issue will be the execution. How do you execute the solution? I just wanted to add that.
Thank you very much.
This idea of bigger markets is interesting, but if you look at China, just talking about China, and its double-digit growth, it really protected its market for a long, long time before opening it. America did the same thing. The UK did the same thing, what feels like an eternity ago. And now we have a sort of a common tariff, supposedly across West Africa. Do you think that is the way to develop industry or whatever economic engines are going to be produced? And what do you think about the coming economic nationalism that you see in Ethiopia and Rwanda and Morocco?
Well, I think the first thing to keep in mind is the following, is that, you know, the flap doesn't have to flap both ways. What China did very successfully was that it allowed inward investments, a lot of it, factories, foreign direct investments. It did not encourage as much portfolio investments until later in the game. What you see in Africa is actually more the opposite. You have more of portfolio investments in the stock exchanges. And so every time the portfolio investors move money out, you have a problem. You had it in Ghana, you had it in Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, you name it. And I think philosophically, the decision makers have to position their countries to be attractive destinations for foreign direct investments, not portfolio investments. That's the first thing. The second thing is competitiveness in the African market is very, very low. Productivity is very, very low. It's very low for reasons that you've already referred to: high transportation, no power. You know, I mean, South Africa, ESCOM, when I started doing business in South Africa in the mid-90s, was the 5th largest utility in the world. ESCOM had a higher rating than the government of South Africa. You have power outages in South Africa today. Okay. So, to answer your question, I think that the challenge for Africa is to say, how do we get to double-digit growth? How do we finance that without necessarily going to the World Bank or the other external sources of finance? Ethiopia has a model which I don't personally agree with, but I can understand the logic. You can't have foreign banks in Ethiopia. Okay, I don't think it makes sense. Bring the money in. Okay, the point is taking the money out is what you should manage. And so what you have in Africa a lot of times is policies that don't encourage foreign direct investments. And the mindset in Africa has to be, how do we do that effectively? You cannot do that without bigger markets. I spent 12.5 years in Togo. Togo is 5 million people, 6-7 billion GDP. Togo is going nowhere on its own. However, guess what? Next door to Togo is Ghana. Next door is 2 doors away, it's Cote d'Ivoire. 2 doors away on the other side is Nigeria. I would prefer, and I'm of Nigerian origin, to have a factory in Togo supplying those markets today. I can't do it. I can, but I have to put aside a lot of money to get a few things done along the way, which makes it less competitive. So the answer is simple. The execution is where the problem is. There are no models. I mean, we don't have to be innovative in some manner that hasn't been done before. But the fact is that the Ethiopians wanted to build that dam, and they couldn't get the funding for it. So they've levied their own people, and they're building it. And it's going ahead. There's another dam in Ghana. One of the parties who were to that project told us at another conference it took 11 years from when they started to when they finished signing for the dam before the project starts. You can't develop that way. You've got to find a source of financing that allows you to develop at a much faster pace, which is where the saving comes in. China was able to, at one point, I think 40%. Okay, it's come down a bit now because the economy is. But what I'm saying is that you cannot develop from external funding. You have to generate your own funding and have the support of external funding. You should not ignore external funding, but the model of development in Africa today, which is basically how do we go to the World Bank, how do we go to the international market to raise money, it's wrong. And I'll give you an example. If you look at the total import, export, telco, fees, airfares, it comes to about 1 trillion. You fly a lot, right? You know how much they get taxed on when you pay for your ticket, 30% of that goes to the government in taxes, so that's a huge amount. If you take 1 to 2% of all those payments, that works out somewhere around $20 to $30 billion a year. That can be applied, and that can work. And then the countries start looking at generating savings to support development. But if each time you want to make a major development, maybe it's the Inga Dam or railway project, you go cap in hand internationally to raise the money, it doesn't work. And the other thing that happens, which again I want to emphasize, you need big banks in countries. Only big banks finance roads, industries, and so on. All these ideas about microfinance banks and all that, they're nice ideas, very nice. But they don't develop countries because they can't finance the roads. So if Kenya has 45 banks, in my opinion, it's 40 banks too many. Okay? Nigeria has developed and continued to grow at 6 to 7% a year. It's not because they had good policies. You know the policies were terrible. But it's because the banks could finance that development. Dangote is doing a $9 billion project. Half of that is being provided by Nigerian banks. 5 billion. Where else can you do that out of South Africa, Egypt, and Morocco? The other countries, in Ghana, for example, used to run around all over London getting money for its oil imports until EcoBank started financing it for them. And then suddenly the poor minister didn't have to spend all his time traveling around looking for BNP or one of those banks to finance it. The point I'm trying to make, without being provocative, I know I'm being a bit provocative, is that let's step back and ask the right questions. Questions about execution, not questions about, oh, we need to do a study to do this, we need to do a study to do that. You can do, paralysis by studies. I see that in Africa all the time. How many conferences have we been to since 2005? Africa Rising, Africa on the Hub, Africa on this, Africa that. What has happened between then and now? Seriously, nothing. Ghana has gone down. Nigeria has surprised us very nicely by creating a new president, but it's a coalition government. Okay, they have pretty odd bedfellows, who Patrick probably knows better than anybody else. We don't know how it's going to work out, but we're hopeful. His Excellency isn't here, so we know some things that are going on. I don't think Africa is moving forward. I think Africa needs to make a step change. 4, 5%, 6%, it's not good enough. Let's not say, oh, we're doing great. We're not, we're doing pretty badly. We need to improve on that.
Do you see the role of civil society as a way of strengthening democracy in the region, and because of that would influence growth and development in Africa or West Africa?
Of course. I think the real challenge is that we need to make sure that civil society is engaged. Civil society is engaged when they can see the positive impact of government actions. Okay. For example, ECOWAS is very well known across West Africa because you can travel freely across West Africa. Why don't we have an African Union passport? I have a British passport. It's much easier for me to travel in Africa with my British passport than with my Nigerian passport. It's almost like saying it's easier for me to travel in Europe with my Nigerian passport than with my British passport. I mean, you probably laugh, okay? But that's exactly what's going on. And just the sort of things that we're talking about. Civil society has to be engaged in a very positive way because they are agents for change. The change happens at the human level. It doesn't happen at the policy level. It takes people to make change.
But in terms of the single currency, you said that it doesn't make any sense.
At this
point, we already have the French-speaking countries. 9 of them already have a single currency and a single central bank, and that is working pretty well. So why can the English-speaking countries not really align their convergence in order to meet the criteria for the CFR, rather than just thinking about the ECO in an abstract form? My personal thinking is that really the English-speaking countries should align their policies to ensure that they can really meet the criteria for the CFR and be part of that one. They can change the name and name it after anything. They can name it after anything, CFR or ECO or whatever name. That shouldn't make any difference. But at least I personally think that political motivations are the reason why the single currency is not being achieved. But it should make sense that we should have a single currency if we want to really increase intra-regional trade.
Thank you.
I don't know whether you know how the CFA works. The CFA is not a standalone currency. It's a currency that's propped up by the bunker funds. And all the French countries are required to keep a certain amount of their operating balances with the Banque de France. And in return for that, the Banque de France guarantees an exchange pretty much fixed to the euro and a certain level of compatibility into the euro, not into the other currencies. If you put Nigeria into that equation, the Banque de France will not do it because the numbers become extremely large. Okay? Nigeria is 80% of ECOWAS. So there have been talk before maybe putting Nigeria out and putting the others in the CFA. Okay, I've had that talk before. Well, then you don't really have ECOWAS. You have ECOWAS minus Nigeria. The CFA itself has issues because the CFA zone, they don't manage their currency. It's a monetary union. So when they call themselves a central bank, they're not really a central bank in the sense that you can print your own currency and manage your own monetary policy. That is dictated by essentially what happens in Europe. So when the euro is strong, the CFA is strong. When the euro is weak, the CFA is weak. And so when you look at the level of development in the CFA countries, it's usually 2 to 3%. The 5, 6, 7% we talk of is happening because, for example, Ouattara is a very good manager. So he's picked up the numbers there. But most of the other countries are just bumping along. You would think that with almost like a fixed convertibility, there'll be foreign direct investment pouring into those countries. They're not. The question is why? It's because the fundamentals of the CFA, I think, probably are not the right for countries. Countries should have the ability to, in a way, react to market developments.